Homelite. If you're over 40, you've held one. Your father owned one. Maybe it's still in your garage, covered in sawdust and bar oil. 40 years old and somehow still running. The red and white badge. The pull start that fights back. The smell of two-stroke exhaust on a Saturday morning. But Homelite didn't start in a lumber yard. It started in a basement during the Great Depression, built by a man trying to solve a problem that had nothing to do with trees. And when World War II came, Homelite didn't make saws for soldiers. They made something far stranger. And here's the part nobody talks about. The company that defined American weekend labor, the brand synonymous with suburban self-reliance, was killed by the very thing it perfected. This is the story of how a Depression-era engineer, a fleet of wartime generators, and a single disastrous business decision built, and then buried, one of the most recognized names in American garages. Charles Ferguson didn't look like a revolutionary. By 1921, he was an electrical engineer in his early 30s, working out of a rented space in New Jersey with a partner named Abramson. They weren't building empires, they were solving small problems for small money. Electrical relays, switches, components for radios, and early home appliances. The company name was stitched together from what they did: home electrical light equipment, Homelite. And for more than a decade, nobody outside the industrial supply catalogs had ever heard of them. But Ferguson had a problem. He hated relying on the power grid. In the 1930s, electrical service was inconsistent. Brownouts, voltage sags, entire neighborhoods going dark during storms. For a man engineering sensitive equipment, it was intolerable. He didn't need the grid to be better. He needed to replace it. So Ferguson started designing small gasoline-powered generators, portable, lightweight, efficient enough to run off a small two-stroke engine. The idea wasn't new, but Ferguson's execution was. He built them compact, reliable, and crucially, cheap enough to manufacture at scale. By the late 1930s, Homelite had pivoted entirely. No more electrical components. They were a generator company now. Small engines spinning copper coils, power you could carry. And then the US Navy came calling. December 1941. America enters World War II, and the military has a logistics nightmare. How do you power equipment on beaches, in jungles, on islands with no infrastructure? You can't string electrical lines across the Pacific. You need portable power, thousands of units, tens of thousands. Homelite's generators were already the best in their class. Compact, durable, field repairable. The Navy didn't just order them, they standardized them. For 4 years, Homelite's factories in New York and North Carolina ran at full war capacity. They built auxiliary generators for PT boats, backup power units for field hospitals, lightweight charging systems for radio operators landing on hostile shores. Ferguson had built a company that could make 50 units a year. The war forced him to make 50,000. And when the war ended, Homelite had a new problem. They were very, very good at building small, lightweight two-stroke engines, but nobody needed generators anymore. 1946. The war is over. Millions of men return home. The suburbs explode. Levittown, tract housing, the GI Bill. Every man a homeowner, every home a project, and every project needs tools. Homelite looked at their tooling, their supply chains, their stockpiles of two-stroke engines, and asked a simple question: what else can we put an engine on? Chainsaws already existed, but they were industrial, heavy, two-man operations. A typical chainsaw in 1946 weighed over 100 pounds and needed a crew to operate. You didn't own one. A logging company owned one. Homelite saw the gap. What if you could build a chainsaw light enough for one man? Powered by the same compact two-stroke engine they'd been making for the Navy? What if you could sell it not to logging companies, but to homeowners? The smell of fresh-cut pine in a suburban backyard. A man in work boots and a flannel shirt, standing over a felled tree in his own yard, holding a machine that would have required a logging crew 10 years earlier. That was the image Homelite sold, and America bought it. By 1950, Homelite had become the largest producer of lightweight chainsaws in the United States. Not because they invented the chainsaw, because they made it accessible. The Model 17, the Super 40, the Zip. These weren't industrial tools, they were consumer products. Bright red, chromed pull starts, marketed in Popular Mechanics and Field and Stream. Your neighbor had one, so you needed one. But Homelite didn't stop at chainsaws. They couldn't. The same engine that powered a chainsaw could power anything. string trimmers, leaf blowers, water pumps, portable generators. Yes, they kept making those. Pressure washers, hedge trimmers. If it needed a small gasoline engine and could be sold at a hardware store, Homelite built it. By the 1960s, they were everywhere. Sears sold them, Montgomery Ward sold them, independent hardware stores stocked them on end caps. Homelite had become the brand of American self-reliance, the weekend warrior, the do-it-yourself homeowner who didn't call a landscaper because he had a garage full of red and white machines. But there was a problem growing, a problem Homelite wouldn't notice until it was too late. They had built their entire empire on one assumption, that American men wanted to do their own work, and for 20 years that assumption printed money. But by the 1970s, something was shifting. The chainsaws were still selling, but the users were changing. Homelite had always aimed at homeowners, casual users, the guy who cut firewood twice a year, the retiree clearing brush from his back 40. But casual users don't maintain equipment. They don't rebuild carburetors. They don't clean fuel filters. They run them hard, put them away dirty, and expect them to start again next spring. And Homelite's saws, built for volume, built for price, were not built for that kind of abuse. Imagine, it's 1978, you're standing in your driveway, pulling the starter cord on a Homelite XL12 for the 15th time. It's flooded. The spark plug is fouled. The fuel smells like varnish because you left gas in it all winter. You're angry, and you're starting to notice that your neighbor, the one who works for the county forestry department, runs a Steel. And it always starts. Steel, Husqvarna, John Serdade, European brands, professional grade. Heavier initial price, but built to be repaired. Modular, over-engineered. They weren't marketing to homeowners. They were marketing to professionals who demanded reliability, and to homeowners who were tired of disposable tools. Homelite faced a choice: re-engineer their saws for durability, raise prices, accept lower margins, or double down on volume, cheaper materials, simpler assemblies, sell more units at lower cost, and assume consumers would keep replacing them. They chose volume, and it worked. For a while. Through the late 70s and early 80s, Homelite remained a bestseller. They were in every big box store, every rental center, every hardware chain. The saws got cheaper, lighter, easier to stock, but something else was happening in the professional market. Something Homelite didn't see coming. Because they never thought of themselves as a chainsaw company. They thought of themselves as an engine company. That's why they succeeded. They had a decade-long head start making the exact engine a lightweight chainsaw needed, because they'd already built tens of thousands for the military. When the competition was still trying to shrink industrial saws, Homelite already had the engine sitting on a shelf. But that same identity, engine company, not tool company, became a vulnerability. Because engine companies think about volume and cost per unit, tool companies think about reputation and rebuild cycles. And by 1980, Homelite's reputation was starting to crack. The reviews in trade magazines were polite but damning. Adequate for occasional use, not recommended for professional applications, best suited for light-duty homeowner tasks. In other words, it's cheap, and it works until it doesn't. Meanwhile, Stihl and Husqvarna were doing something Homelite had never prioritized. They built dealer networks, independent servicing shops, certified repair techs, proprietary parts pipelines. If your Steel broke, you took it to a dealer. They rebuilt it. You had it back in 3 days. If your Homelite broke, you threw it away and bought another one. By the mid-1980s, the chainsaws piling up in landfills and behind sheds weren't Stihls, they were Homelites. Faded red plastic, seized pistons, cracked fuel tanks. The brand of self-reliance had become the brand of planned obsolescence. In 1983, Homelite was sold to Textron, a conglomerate that also owned Bell helicopters and Cessna aircraft. Textron didn't care about chainsaws. They cared about cash flow. So they did what conglomerates do. They cut costs, maximized short-term revenue, and milked the brand. The engineering staff shrank. R&D budgets disappeared. Manufacturing was offshored. Homelite chainsaws were no longer made in North Carolina. They were assembled in Mexico, then China, then wherever the lowest bid came from. And here's the quiet horror of it. The saws still looked like Homelites. Same color scheme, same logo, same packaging, but they weren't the same machines. The metal components became plastic. The carburetors became non-adjustable. The air filters became disposable. you couldn't rebuild them anymore, because there was nothing to rebuild, and the market noticed. By the 1990s, professional users had abandoned Homelite entirely. Landscapers, arborists, municipal crews, they all ran Stug or Husqvarna, but Homelite still sold in huge numbers, because they were everywhere. Home Depot, Lowe's, Walmart, the brand that once represented quality you could afford, had become affordability without quality. And the American consumer, especially the weekend warrior, the retiree, the guy who just needed to trim one tree, kept buying them, not because they were good, because they were there, and they were $40 cheaper than the alternative. So here's the paradox. Homelite survived by becoming exactly what it had disrupted. In 1946, Homelite had taken a professional industrial tool and made it accessible to homeowners. By 1996, Homelite had taken a homeowner tool and made it disposable. They'd come full circle, but this time, they were the ones being disrupted. In 1994, Textron sold Homelite again, this time to John Deere, who briefly tried to rehabilitate the brand. It didn't work, because the damage wasn't in the factories, it was in the perception. Portable generators, thousands of them, built for the Navy, designed to deliver reliable power in the worst conditions on Earth. Those generators taught Homelite how to build lightweight two-stroke engines at scale, engines that could run hard, run light, and run cheap. That knowledge, that manufacturing expertise, was the only reason Homelite could produce a consumer chainsaw in 1946. Nobody else had the engine. But the same war that gave Homelite the technology also taught them the wrong lesson. That volume was everything. That you could build fast, build cheap, and win by flooding the market. It worked in war. It worked in the post-war boom. But it doesn't work when your customers expect the tool to outlive the project. By 2001, Homelite was sold again, this time to Tektronic Industries, a Hong Kong-based conglomerate that also owns Ryobi, Rigid, and Milwaukee Tool. Under TTI, Homelite became what it is today, a budget brand, sold exclusively through Home Depot. Positioned below Ryobi, chainsaw prices starting at $99. The saws still carry the name. The red and white logo is still there, but there's no engineering division, no R&D lab, no North Carolina factory. Homelite is a trademark now, not a company. Walk into a Home Depot today, go to the outdoor power equipment aisle. You'll see them, Homelite chainsaws, shrink-wrapped in plastic, lined up on shelves next to Black & Decker weed trimmers and Ryobi leaf blowers. Pick one up. It's light, almost too light. The body flexes slightly when you grip it. The pull cord feels thin, and if you're over 50, you might feel a flicker of recognition, because you remember when that brand meant something different. So what's left? Not much in the stores. But in garages across America, there's a different story. Because the Homelites from the 1960s and 70s, the Super XLs, the XP 1000s, the old red and silver monsters, a lot of them still run. They're heavy, loud, they vibrate like a jackhammer and spray bar oil everywhere, but they start, and there's a small quiet community of people who rebuild them, who keep them running, who source parts from eBay and trade carburetors in forum classifieds, not because they're valuable, because they remember what Homelite used to be. Homelite's arc is the same arc as 100 other American manufacturing brands: Sunbeam, Craftsman, Schwinn, Zenith, brands built on engineering, grown on volume, and killed by the very efficiency they perfected. They succeeded by making tools affordable. They died by making tools cheap. And here's the thing nobody wants to say out loud. The market didn't reject them. The market wanted cheap. They perfected low-cost volume manufacturing. They figured out how to make a chainsaw so cheaply that it could be sold at a loss leader price and still turn a profit. And once they proved it was possible, every other brand copied them. Poulan, Craftsman, McCulloch. Homelite didn't lose to better competitors. They lost to themselves. Because once the market learned that chainsaws could cost $89, no one would pay $240 for a Homelite, even if it was better. And Homelite couldn't survive selling the $89 saw forever, because someone else would always sell it for $79. There's a picture that floats around collector forums. It's a Homelite promotional photo from 1952. A man in a clean flannel shirt and work gloves, standing in a sunlit yard, holding a chainsaw with one hand. He's smiling. The saw weighs 30 pounds, lighter than anything else on the market at the time. And in that photo you can see the whole promise. This is a tool that gives you control over your property, your trees, your weekend. You don't need a crew. You don't need a contractor. You just need this. 70 years later, you can still buy a Homelite chainsaw. But the promise is different. Now it says, this is good enough. Charles Ferguson, the man who started it all, lived long enough to see Homelite become a giant. He died in 1965, just as the brand was reaching its peak. He never saw the offshore manufacturing, the Textron sale, the budget bin rebranding. Maybe that's a kindness. There's something uniquely American about a tool brand that prospers, collapses, and then lingers as a ghost of itself. Because we don't let these things die cleanly. We keep them on life support. We hollow them out, fill them with cheaper components, and keep selling the name. It's not about the tool anymore. It's about the memory of the tool. And if you've ever pulled a rusty Homelite out of a shed, cleaned the carburetor, replaced the fuel line, and gotten it running again, you know exactly what I mean. Because it's not about saving money. You could buy a new saw for less than the cost of the parts. It's about the fact that this one should still work. And that used to mean something. Homelite's factory in Charlotte, North Carolina closed in 1996. The building still stands. It's been repurposed twice. First as a distribution warehouse, now as mixed-use commercial space. There's no plaque, no historical marker. If you didn't know what it was, you'd drive right past it. And that's fitting in a way, because Homelite's legacy isn't in a building, it's in a sound. The bark of a pull start on a cold morning, the rattling idle of a two-stroke engine, the smell of bar oil and gasoline and sawdust. For a generation of American men, that sound is Saturday. It's self-reliance. It's independence. It's the feeling that you can still fix things yourself, even if the saw only lasts one season, even if it's made of plastic, even if the name doesn't mean what it used to. There's one more thing. Something the company, Tektronic Industries, the current owner of the Homelite trademark, has never commented on. In 2011, a group of former Homelite engineers tried to buy the brand back. Not the budget line, the name itself. They wanted to relaunch it as a premium heritage brand, American-made, rebuild-friendly, expensive, the opposite of what it had become. They offered a reasonable number. They had backing. They had a plan. Tektronic turned them down, not because the offer was too low, because a premium Homelite would compete with their own product lines, Ryobi, Rigid, Milwaukee. So the brand stays where it is, locked in the budget aisle, selling just enough units to justify the trademark renewal. And somewhere in a garage in Virginia, or Wisconsin, or Oregon, a man pulls the starter cord on a 1978 Homelite Super 40. It coughs. He pulls again. It catches. The engine settles into that familiar rattling idle. He picks up the saw, and for just a moment, it's 1965 again. Homelite still exists, but no one can quite say what it is anymore. A tool brand, a trademark, a memory. Maybe that's the real story. Not how it died, but how it refuses to.